I used to believe my childhood was normal, not perfect, just normal. The kind where parents guide you, correct you, and push you forward because they see something better in you than you see in yourself. That illusion lasted until I started noticing a pattern I was too young to understand, but too old to ignore. It didn't begin with something dramatic. It began with silence. When I was 8, I won my first school award for handwriting. I remember holding that certificate so tightly, my fingers crumpled the edges. I ran home faster than I had ever run in my life. I thought my parents would smile. I thought my mother would hug me. I thought my father would finally look at me the way fathers in movies looked at their proud sons. Instead, my mother glanced at it for less than 3 seconds. "Don't get carried away," she said flatly. "It's just handwriting, not something important." My father didn't even look up from his phone. That night, I saw the certificate placed in a drawer, never framed, never mentioned again, like it never existed. At first, I told myself they were just strict, that they didn't believe in small achievements, that real praise came later for bigger things. So I kept trying, but every milestone I reached seemed to shrink in their hands. When I came second in a district quiz competition, my teacher called my parents to congratulate them. I overheard the call. My mother said he should have come first, second means nothing. When I scored highest in my class in science, my father frowned and said, maybe the paper was easy. No celebration, no pride, only reduction, like everything I did was something to be minimized, not valued. Still, I tried harder, but something darker began to happen. I once prepared for a regional art competition that I had trained months for. My teacher personally selected my entry. I remember the excitement in my chest, like I was finally stepping into something that mattered. The submission deadline was on a Saturday. On Friday night, my mother cleaned my room. The next morning, my artwork was gone. She didn't apologize, she didn't panic. She simply said, "I thought it was old scrap paper. You should be more organized." I remember standing there frozen, feeling something inside me shift for the first time. Not anger yet. Something worse, confusion, because accidents make sense, but patterns don't, and there were too many patterns. Opportunities disappeared before I could reach them. Forms were lost. Teachers stopped recommending me for programs I qualified for. Even simple things, like permission slips, were conveniently forgotten or misplaced. Whenever I questioned it, the response was always the same. "You're too emotional. You're imagining things. You should be grateful we even care." That phrase, "you should be grateful," became a chain wrapped around every thought I had. By the time I turned 12, I stopped sharing my achievements altogether. It was easier that way, less disappointment, less humiliation, less hope. But inside the house, something even more suffocating grew: comparison. My parents began pointing at other children like they were trophies I had failed to become. "Look at him. He's disciplined. She already knows what she wants in life. Why can't you be more like them?" It was never encouragement, it was replacement. Like I was something defective, they were constantly measuring against better models. The worst moment of my childhood came when I won first place in a school debate. I was sure, absolutely sure, this time would be different. I practiced for weeks. I memorized arguments. I stayed up rehearsing in front of a mirror until my voice cracked. When I stood on that stage, I felt powerful. When I stepped down holding the trophy, I felt unstoppable. But when I came home, my father looked at me and said something I still remember word for word. "Winning school debates won't feed you in real life. Stop wasting time on useless things." That night, I placed the trophy on my shelf. The next morning, it was gone. When I asked about it, my mother said, "We donated old junk to free space." I stopped asking after that, because something inside me began to understand what I couldn't accept yet. It wasn't ignorance, it wasn't carelessness. It was control, and I was living inside it. Even as a child, I didn't have the language for what was happening to me, but I knew the feeling. Like, every time I grew taller, someone was quietly pushing me back down, and I didn't know it then. But those were only the first 13 years of something that would eventually destroy every milestone I ever tried to reach. Until the day I stopped being their silent child and became the truth they could no longer bury. By the time I entered my teenage years, something had already been broken inside me. But I didn't have the words for it yet. I just knew that trying felt dangerous. Still, I tried anyway, because hope doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly, like light leaking out of a cracked window. At 14, I discovered something that made me feel alive again: science competitions. It started small, a school-level project on renewable energy. I worked on it every night after homework, building models from cardboard and wires, imagining a future where my ideas mattered. My teacher noticed immediately. "You're talented," she said. "You should apply for the regional science fair." For the first time in years, I felt something close to pride. That night, I told my parents. My mother barely looked up. "Science fairs are distractions." My father added, "Focus on your studies, nothing else matters." But I didn't listen. I filled out the application anyway. I remember hiding it inside my school bag, like it was something sacred. The submission deadline was in 1 week. On the third day, my school sent a reminder slip home. I never saw it. My application never reached the fair. When I asked my teacher later, she looked confused. "We never received your form." I went home shaking, holding back something I didn't fully understand yet. "What happened to my application?" I asked. My mother didn't even hesitate. "You probably forgot to submit it." But I didn't forget. I never forgot anything that mattered. That was the first time I realized something terrifying. My efforts didn't just fail, they disappeared. As I grew older, the pattern sharpened. At 15, I got selected for a summer internship program through school. It was my first real chance to step into something beyond my home. The acceptance letter arrived. I remember seeing it in my teacher's hands. But I never received it at home. Instead, my father casually mentioned, "Your school called. They said you weren't selected." I froze. "That's not true," I saw. He cut me off. "Are you saying your school is lying or your father is?" That question ended every argument I ever tried to have. Because in my house, questioning them wasn't disagreement. It was disrespect. So I stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean ignorance. It just means storage. Everything I couldn't say was piling up inside me. At 16, I started noticing something else. How carefully my parents controlled my relationships. Friends were discouraged, bad influence. Study groups were blocked, waste of time. Even teachers who showed too much interest in my progress were subtly pushed away. One of my favorite teachers once told me quietly, "I think you're being held back at home." The next week, she stopped teaching my class. She transferred, no explanation, no warning, just gone. I stopped bringing people home after that, not because I didn't want connection, but because I didn't want them to disappear. That year, I applied for a national academic scholarship on my own. I filled out the forms at school, checked everything, and handed it in personally. I remember the weight of hope in my chest that day, heavy, fragile, real. 2 weeks later, I was told I had not submitted anything. When I confronted my parents, my mother sighed like I was exhausting her. "You're becoming obsessed with competitions," she said. "It's unhealthy." My father added coldly, "We're trying to raise you properly, not turn you into someone arrogant." That word became their favorite weapon. Anything I wanted became arrogance. Anything I achieved became luck. Anything I lost became my fault. And slowly, I began to believe I was the problem, not the system around me. But deep down, something resisted, because no matter how many times I failed, the pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Deadlines missed, letters gone, opportunities redirected, doors closing right before I reached them. And every time, my parents were the only constant in the room. The breaking point came when I almost escaped it all. At 17, I was shortlisted for a full academic program in another city. It was everything I had worked for my entire life. My teacher called personally to confirm my selection. I remember standing in the hallway when I heard it. "You should be proud of him," she said. "He's one of the top candidates." I felt my heart explode with hope. That night, I waited for my parents to say anything. Instead, my father placed a folded paper on the table. It was a rejection notice. I already handled it, he said. My world didn't just stop. It cracked. "You what?" I whispered. My mother didn't even look at me. "You're too young to go alone. We made the right decision." Made the decision. Without me, without my voice, without my future. Something inside me didn't break that time. It hardened. For the first time, I didn't feel confused anymore. I felt awake, because I finally understood the truth I had been avoiding for 13 years. It was never about protection. It was never about guidance. It was control carefully built, quietly executed, and systematically repeated until I stopped recognizing my own potential. And that night, lying in the dark, I made a decision I had never allowed myself to make before. If my life was being taken from me piece by piece, then one day, I would take it back completely. The day I stopped asking permission, everything changed. Not at home, because at home, nothing ever truly changed. But inside me, I was still living under the same roof, still waking up to the same voices, still sitting at the same dinner table, where my future was casually rewritten without me. But something in me had shifted. I stopped believing their version of my life, and that was the beginning of my escape. At 18, I managed something my parents never expected. I got into a university on my own, using documents I handled directly through my school and counselor. I didn't tell them everything. I couldn't afford to, because every time I had trusted them with my progress, it disappeared. This time, I made sure nothing could be lost. When the acceptance confirmation came, I hid it, not out of fear anymore, but strategy. For the first time, I understood something important. Silence wasn't weakness if it was used as protection. When I told my parents I would be studying locally, they didn't question it much. They had already built a version of me in their minds, one that would stay small, obedient, and dependent. My mother nodded. "Good. Staying close to home is better for you." My father barely reacted. "Focus on grades. Don't get distracted again." They didn't realize I had already left in every way that mattered. The first months of university felt like breathing after years underwater. No one told me my goals were useless. No one hid my applications. No one called my ambition arrogance. For the first time, my effort turned into results. I studied late nights not out of fear but choice. I joined academic clubs. I volunteered for projects, and slowly, the version of me they had tried to shrink started expanding in every direction they had once forbidden. But I didn't celebrate loudly. I couldn't, because part of me still expected everything to be taken away. That expectation never fully left. Then came the truth I had been building toward without realizing it: independence. I got a part-time research assistant position through one of my professors. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. My name appeared on papers. My work started mattering in ways my childhood never allowed. I remember staring at my first acknowledgement in a published report for a long time, just trying to convince myself it wasn't temporary. Because nothing in my past had ever lasted. During that time, my parents tried to pull me back. At first, it was subtle. You should visit more often. Then guilt, family is everything, don't forget who raised you. Then pressure. You're changing. You think you're better than us now. But I didn't argue any more. I had learned something powerful. Explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is just another form of surrender. So I became careful, not distant out of hatred, but controlled out of necessity. Then I met her, my fiancée. She didn't enter my life loudly. She entered quietly, like someone who had no interest in fixing me, only understanding me. When I told her fragments of my past, I expected disbelief. Instead, she just said, "That sounds like control disguised as care." No shock, no denial, just clarity. That moment felt more healing than any apology I had ever hoped for. She was the first person who didn't question my memory. That alone changed everything. As our relationship grew, so did my stability. She saw the gaps I had lived with for years, the missing celebrations, the erased achievements, the constant self-doubt I carried like second skin. And she said something I'll never forget. "You didn't fail. You were interrupted." That sentence stayed with me longer than any childhood memory. When we got engaged, I made a decision. My wedding would not be controlled, not anymore. I invited my parents, yes, but not because I wanted reconciliation. Because I wanted truth to stand where lies had lived for so long. Planning the wedding felt strange. For the first time, I didn't hide my achievements. I didn't minimize my life. I didn't ask permission for joy. Every guest list entry was intentional: teachers who once lost contact with me, mentors who had seen my potential, colleagues who knew what I had built on my own, people who knew the truth of my journey. My parents thought they were attending a celebration of their son's settled life. They had no idea they were walking into something else entirely. Because I had spent 13 years being silenced, and now, for the first time, I was ready to be heard. The morning of my wedding felt unreal, not because I was nervous, but because for the first time in my life, I was fully in control of a day that mattered. No approvals to wait for, no hidden forms to disappear, no voice telling me I wasn't enough. Just silence and freedom. The venue was filled slowly, like a rising tide of reality I had been building for years. 200 guests arrived, not just family, but professors, colleagues, mentors, classmates, and people who had seen me become someone my parents always said I could never be. My fiancée stood beside me, steady and calm, like she had always belonged in this moment. She squeezed my hand once and whispered, "Today is yours." I didn't answer, because I was watching the doors. And then they arrived. My parents walked in, as if they owned the air itself. My mother wore pride like armor. My father carried quiet authority, the same one that had silenced me for 13 years. They looked around, expecting admiration, expecting respect, expecting a story where they were the foundation of everything good that had happened to me. They didn't know they were walking into the opposite. The ceremony hadn't started yet. Guests were mingling, talking, smiling. But something subtle began to happen, like ripples before a storm. People started recognizing each other. A professor from my university greeted an old school teacher. A research colleague spoke with someone from my scholarship committee. Small conversations turned into remembering, and remembering turned into truth slipping out. My mother noticed first. "What is this?" she whispered to my father. "Why are there so many educated people here?" He didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, he didn't understand the room. Then the ceremony began. I stood at the front, not as the boy they raised, but as the man they failed to erase. The officiant spoke. My fiancé and I exchanged vows, and everything should have been perfect, but perfection was not what this day was built for. It started during the speeches. A professor stepped forward, smiling at me warmly. "I'd like to say something about him," she began. My parents straightened in their seats, finally expecting praise. But then she continued. "When I first met him, he was a student whose opportunities kept disappearing, applications missing, recommendations blocked. I thought it was confusion at first. The room shifted." My mother's smile tightened. "My colleagues and I later realized something," she said carefully. "He wasn't failing, he was being interrupted." A murmur spread across the guests. My father's expression changed for the first time, uncertainty replacing pride. Then another voice stood up. "A former teacher. I remember calling his home once about a scholarship," she said. "I was told he wasn't interested. But when I spoke to him privately later, he had never even been told about it." The room went quieter. My mother's hands stiffened. Then another guest, a former mentor. "I tried to reach him for a national program. Every time communication stopped at home, it was like someone was filtering his future. The air changed completely. My parents were no longer watching a wedding. They were being watched. Then came the moment I had not spoken about to anyone. I stepped forward, not angrily, not dramatically, just finally. I didn't know all of this was happening at the time. I said calmly. I thought I was failing for years. A silence. 200 people were listening. My voice didn't shake. But I wasn't failing. I continued. I was being erased. My mother stood up immediately. "That's enough. This is ridiculous." But someone else interrupted her. "A school administrator. We still have records," he said quietly. "Forms that were submitted but never reached us. Signatures that were intercepted." That word hit differently. Intercepted, not lost, not forgotten, taken. My father tried to speak, but no sound came out at first. For the first time in his life, he didn't have control over the narrative. My fiancé reached for my hand again. And I didn't look at my parents when I spoke next. "I invited you here," I said, "because I wanted you to see what you said I could never become." A pause. Then I turned slightly. "You said I was wasting time. You said I was distracted. You said I wasn't capable." My voice lowered. "But every milestone you tried to stop still happened." The room was completely silent now, not uncomfortable silence. Truth silence. My mother's eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Panic mixed with disbelief. My father sat down slowly, like his strength had been removed without warning. And, for the first time in my entire life, they had no response that could fix anything, because there was nothing left to deny. The truth was no longer hidden in drawers. It was standing in front of 200 witnesses. When the ceremony ended, applause came not for drama, not for revenge, but for survival. As people congratulated me, I finally understood something I had never been allowed to feel in my childhood. Peace doesn't come from winning against people who hurt you. It comes from no longer needing them to define your story. My parents left early, not in anger, in silence. And as I stood there beside my new life, I realized the most powerful thing that had ever happened to me was not the exposure. It was this: they spent 13 years trying to make sure I would never rise, and I rose anyway.